Now, in this way, verse 40 sets this precedent. We see hospitality not just a cultural norm, right? Not just a good deed to mimic, but a glimpse into the development of a grassroots and relationally driven network that becomes the center of Jesus' expanding earthly ministry. The simple act of receiving those whom Jesus had sent became the foundational activity of the early church. And we see that in Acts 2. What did they do? They gathered together, breaking bread in their homes. And well, it began here with Jesus, sending his disciples out. So for me, as a modern person, it seems really presumptuous to assume you show up in some town and someone's gonna take you in, right? But for them, it was critical. In fact, it was likely the secret to Jesus' success. So then we come to verse 41. Verse 41 says, whoever welcomes a prophet as a prophet will receive a prophet's reward. And whoever welcomes a righteous person as a righteous person will receive a righteous person's reward. The Old Testament contains a number of commands, encouragements for God's people to practice hospitality. In fact, God himself, when he says this, he says, remember the sojourner. Why? Because you were sojourners in Egypt. And he couches it in their experience, their collective and communal experience as slaves in Egypt. Not only that, but any good student of the Torah would know and be able to cite for you specific examples of radical hospitality in the Old Testament and how God responded. So Abraham entertains angels in his home. Rebekah serves and gives refreshment to the camels of Isaac's servant. And this is how Rebekah becomes Isaac's wife, how Rebekah becomes included in the family of promise. Now, famous among all these examples would be the account of the Shunammite woman in 2 Kings chapter 4. She not only provided the prophet Elisha with refreshment, but she gave him a place to stay. So 2 Kings 4, 8-10 reads this way. One day Elisha went to Shunem, and a well-to-do woman was there who urged him to stay for a meal. So whenever he came by, he stopped there to eat. She said to her husband, I know that this man who often comes our way is a holy man of God. Let's make a small room on the roof and put in it a bed and a table, a chair and a lamp for him. Then he can stay there whenever he comes to us. Now, the travel savvy among us will recognize that 2 Kings 4 has just described the Airbnb phenomenon 3,000 years in advance, right? Amenities, bed, lamp, chair, okay? The Shunammite woman's little DIY project produces this furnished guest house so that whenever Elisha the prophet was headed that way, he could, log into the app and reserve the one-bedroom bungalow and have a place to stay. Now, she's not just, capitalizing on living next to the highway or flexing her side hustle skills here. This is a woman who is spiritually sensitive, financially generous, and has spiritual fervor. Like, she recognizes the grace of God in Elisha's ministry. She wants to bless the man of God and bless God. She wants to be a part of the work that God is doing. And she finds a way to do that. Let's face it, being a prophet was a high stakes endeavor. Most of the Old Testament prophets' experience was very much like what David described a couple of weeks ago. Opposition from social, military, and political forces. They were, cast out by their families. They were imprisoned. They were beaten. Some were even killed. And so to give this grace, this blessing to Elisha would have been, I'm sure, welcomed. Now, interestingly, if you read the rest of the story, Elisha is sitting on the couch, this comfy couch that she's provided for him, and he thinks to himself, what could we do for this woman? He asks his servant Gehazi, what should we do for her? And so it goes on that Elisha shares with her, like, God is going to bless you. At the time that she met Elisha, she was childless. In that culture, Childlessness was often seen as an embarrassment, maybe evidence that God was punishing you. You had done something wrong. Why wouldn't God bless you with children? And so despite the fact that she was well-to-do, we might think that she would have an honored position in her culture. Most likely she was ostracized. She was the subject of whispers and backdoor conversations. And so God blesses her through Elisha. He gives this prophetic word. She has this son. The son grows, but in his youth, he tragically falls ill, and he dies. And this text tells us that she places him on the couch, Elisha's couch. So then she goes immediately to find Elisha. She tells him the story, and he comes. And what does Elisha do? Well, he does what any of us would do, right? He lays on the child and breathes into his mouth and raises him from the dead. No, he does what only God can do. The prophet brings the prophet's reward. Her relationship to Elisha gives her access to God and his power and his resurrection. And she sees the blessing. Now, before you all go out and put an addition on your home with a sign that says "Prophets Welcome," I don't want to make this seem like it's formulaic. Right? This isn't Jesus' advice on how to manipulate the cosmic gumball machine. I want a red gumball, not a blue gumball. This is really about God, about God's character, about the fact that God is faithful to bless. Blessing the faithful is an immutable trait of God's perfect character. These stories are meant to give us confidence that God sees what we do. Even a cup of cold water given to one of these, my disciple, the smallest act of kindness and generosity. Jesus himself tells us, "My Father, who is in heaven, who sees in secret, will reward in secret." And so whatever you do to bless God's people, God will see it, and God will reward. God will remember. Hebrews 11 tells us that without faith, it is impossible to please God, because anyone who comes to him must believe that he exists and that he rewards those who earnestly seek him.